Welcome, Jet fans, to another episode of the Jets Life podcast. I'm your host, Anthony, and we are at week 7. The Jets, obviously, well documented. They've gone to 0-6 after a terrible performance in London. For those of you who didn't catch, the Wednesday show where we kind of did a deep dive into this game, I'll just kind of touch on it a little bit here. I really want to flush this game deep down the memory drain and just never think about it again. Awful performance by Justin Fields, taking 9 sacks in this game. Sacks where he, let's be real, had about 2.9 seconds on 8 of those sacks. One of the sacks, 2.1 seconds, of time to throw. It's unacceptable. Unacceptable is probably using the word lightly. You're talking about a situation where, late in the game, taking 2 sacks on that final drive, including a sack on first down, to really back this team up when, let's be real, the play call should have been just run it 3 times, try and get Folk into position for a 50, 55-yard field goal, somewhere in that range. And unfortunately, we all know what happened. They take a couple sacks, 4th down comes up, and to take a sack on 4th down with the game on the line, it's just idiotic. It's a big reason to why his interceptions are at 0 for the current year. He's not taking any chances, and there's going to come a point in time, and I don't know why it wasn't on Sunday, but there's going to come a point in time where we have to have real discussions on whether or not he is going to be the answer for the rest of the season, or if the Jets need to make a transition to Tyrod Taylor. I know we've seen what Tyrod Taylor is. I understand that game against Buffalo probably wasn't his shining moment. Not against Buffalo. Against Tampa wasn't his shining moment. But it's getting to a point where Fields almost looks terrified to make a mistake, as opposed to just being aggressive. This is a guy that, coming out of Ohio State, pushed the ball down the field. He was a quarterback that I thought was right there, 1 and 2, with Trevor Lawrence. To be the top guy. Obviously, Trevor Lawrence was the clear-cut number 1, but I wasn't as disappointed when the Jets won that game late in the season because, in my eyes at the time, I thought Justin Fields was going to be that, sort of secondary option and all would be good. And early in his career, maybe it looked like it wasn't that bad of a pick. He looked pretty solid with Chicago for a couple of years, at least as a playmaker. Always had his deficiencies as a thrower. Don't know if that's due to play calling or whatever have you, but he was put in a bad situation there with a poor offensive line and defensive-minded head coach kind of working towards his development. With all that being said, Justin Fields is not the answer. Really needs to turn the page here. If you're a Jets fan, you need to be eyeballing what the future looks like, and I gotta be real, the Jets will probably be picking in the top 5. I mean, there's no. Barring some massive turnaround that I don't see, but barring some massive turnaround, the Jets are clearly a top 5 picking team in this next year's draft. So there's a number of quarterbacks that you can take a look at, and you can see them on a weekly basis. Fernando Mendoza, Ty Simpson, Dante Moore, Lenore Sellers, obviously all come with their flaws, all come with their strengths. There's no Trevor Lawrence this year. There's no Andrew Luck. There's no Peyton Manning. There's no clear-cut guy, no Caleb Williams, no guy that you look at and say, okay, that's the number 1 pick. We're tanking, and we're tanking for that player specifically. This is not the year for that. There's an open bag of multiple options, kind of similar to the Sam Darnold year when he was coming out. There was a number of quarterbacks that you can eyeball and say there. Sam Darnold was, in most people's eyes, it was a suck for Sam year, But obviously, we all see what ended up transpiring in a year where everyone thought Sam Darnold was a clear-cut guy. Browns kind of, zigged while other teams were zagging and went for Baker Mayfield. And obviously, both those guys look great. Josh Allen, obviously one of the best quarterbacks in the league, if not the best. You can make that argument 100% sure. He won the MVP last year. Lamar Jackson being picked late in the first round. It was a draft of some elite quarterbacks. The top quarterbacks in the league came from that draft. A lot of them did. and then obviously Josh Rosen was the odd man out, but he was a one and done quarterback player. Arizona moved on very quick after that number one pick the following year. A lot to be said. The Jets are going to be picking in the draft, unless something they get a jolt to some degree, and this defense might be exactly what this team needed. What we saw in that last game, I got to see more. Obviously, I'm not gonna say anything here, but there was a lot of players in there that we haven't seen before playing critical snaps, and maybe that's what this defense needed. Maybe they needed a jolt, something different than what this team has been for the last few years. A different slot corner playing outside of Michael Carter and Jarvis Brownlee, who made his impact very quickly with a forced fumble on the opening drive, giving the Jets offense great field position where they were only able to capitalize a field goal. Unacceptable from the offensive standpoint. That's your opening drive. You have a sheet of plays that you have an opening script for, and you weren't able to even drive the ball down the field at all. I don't even think they got a first down on that possession, if I remember right. It's unacceptable. But Brownlee coming in with a huge punch out on the opening possession. The linebacker play was a lot better than it's been in the previous years. Sherwood and Mayogo specifically. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that name correctly. I'm saying it as quickly as I can to make it sound like I know what I'm talking about. But solid play. Sherwood had a bad drive in this game. I think it was in the second quarter. But otherwise, I mean, the defense as a whole was just eons better than it's been throughout the first 5 weeks of the season. It was a major bright spot for this game in what was considered to be a atrocious game from the offensive side of the ball. And one player I want to call out having his first game back, and I know his name is out there in the news. I know there's a lot of chatter on what are the Jets going to do with this guy. Are they going to trade him? This, that, blah, blah, blah. Jermaine Johnson showed in this game that he is more than just a solid player on the edge. I think when you look at the Jets I think one of the biggest weaknesses on this defense and the team as a whole, I think they're lacking a true leaders on this team. They have good players. Sauce Gardner is a great player. Garrett Wilson's a great player. And I kind of put Garrett Wilson in the category of a good leader. But I think they're missing those, like, enforcers. Someone in the huddle that's just going to, when things aren't going well, he's going to let you hear it. And Jermaine Johnson just really comes off as that kind of guy, has that kind of attitude. I feel like the Jets are a better team when he's in the huddle than when he's not. I would say the same thing for Quinnen Williams being like an elite player, plays at a high level. I just don't think you get that mentality from Quinnen Williams. He's a leader by what he does on the field. One of the best players, if not the best player on this team. Quinnen Williams is exactly that. He's an enforcer by his play. But Jermaine Johnson, I think, is just a vocal leader for this team. If you ask me to pick today on who to sell, who to whatever, I do not view Jermaine Johnson as a player that this team should be walking away from. He's a great player, great athlete. Coming off an Achilles, you expect him to miss some time. Injuries, I wouldn't say injuries have been a problem. Obviously, he screwed up the Achilles last year, came back this year. Had an injury on the other leg. Obviously, like injuries are something you look at for Jermaine Johnson. It probably gives this regime a little hesitation on whether or not to, provide a long-term contract extension for a guy like Jermaine Johnson, just based off of that. But I just feel like the Jets are missing players like Jermaine Johnson. It doesn't make sense to trade away a player like that is Jermaine Johnson. He's by every account, the face of this defense from a standpoint of his leadership intangibles. It's something the team is lacking. It's something they've been lacking since CJ Mosley's been gone. I think last year one of the bigger issues where this defense took a drop off. Obviously, a lot of everything can point to the coaching change, obviously being something there, moving off from Salah, going on to Ulbrich, and then obviously the defense took major steps in the wrong direction. But I think you could point to C.J. Mosley missing a lot of time, Jermaine Johnson getting injured and tearing his Achilles in week 2 against Tennessee. Those moments where this team, they lost their leader, in my opinion. They lost someone that led by example and actually backed it up with his talk. I think that was a huge hit for this team. And, I think we saw it in his one game back, and we'll have to see it more. Obviously, like maybe that was just it's the NFL. Every player has good days. Every unit has good days, and every unit has bad days. The Jets defense has more bad days than good. Last week was one of their only good performance in the first 6 weeks of the season. So you got to see more. Maybe, against Carolina, a team that has struggled on the road, maybe you get to see this defense stack a few weeks in a row, and you actually have something to look at, and you can actually point to something in Aaron Glenn where you get a little more confidence for what this regime can be and what it should be moving forward. But as of right now, obviously there's a lot of chatter out there, a lot of angry Jet fans, rightfully so, on what Aaron Glenn has put on the field so far this season. But maybe this defense taking a turn for the better can actually kind of get fans feeling a little better. It may not lead to wins if this offense playing as terrible as it has been. And obviously, a big conversation point is Garrett Wilson missing some time. Garrett Wilson has been, a good chunk of what this offense's success has been throughout the season. And to lose him for an extended period of time, it sounds like he'll probably miss a few weeks. And the Jets have that bye week. The hope is that he would be back by the first game after the bye week, which I believe is against Cleveland, if I remember right. Looking at, I can pull it up really quick. But I'm pretty sure that Cleveland game is the game following the bye week. That you would expect to be his first game back. It's coming up now. Yeah, Cleveland, November 9th. That's a game you kind of target as a potential return date for Garrett Wilson. And, man, you look at this Jets schedule and things look very grim. If they can't get a win this week against the Panthers, obviously I will Cleveland as a potential victory, but Cleveland has an outstanding defense. Patriots in New England. We've seen what the Patriots have done in the start of this season, first place in the division. Following that, the Ravens, which obviously they're off to a slow start, but Lamar Jackson missing some time. He'll likely be back by November 23rd, you would expect. Falcons, and then you got the December games, which obviously a lot can happen between now and then. Could be a completely different team that we're talking about. When you just look at it at face value, if they don't get this win against Carolina, it's hard to identify where that victory is coming from. So all we can kind of do is take us one game at a time, and that's what this team needs to do. So what I'll start doing here now is I'll start talking about this Carolina game, and we'll have to dive into some of these matchups and see what this team needs to do in order to come out with an upset. Can you believe we're talking about an upset against Carolina? That walking into the season, I viewed this as one of the win games. So when you go down the schedule and you try and predict what the Jets are going to do, and all of us were crazy for our predictions because many Jet fans probably had this team winning 5 to 7 games, and that's a low bar. It's a low bar to hit, and the Jets are going to not even. It looks like not even come close to hitting that bar again, barring some drastic change. Again, this defense played great last week. Can they stack days like that, weeks like that in a row? We'll have to find out. But they got a tough matchup against a hot team this week. So let's dive right into it. And I think the easiest place to start, and I know we're talking defense first. I guess I can continue on defensive trend. I was kind of hitting on the offense first. But let's start with the defense because let's be real. The Jets are going to win this game. They're going to win this game because of the defense. The offense isn't going to put up 40 points. They're not going to put up 30 points. It's not going to be a situation like that. Although, I mean, anything's possible, but seems unlikely that they're going to put up high amount of points. So we'll start with the defense, and where they need to start is they've got to control this running game. Rico Dowdle has been an absolute monster the last couple of weeks. Had a revenge game against Dallas last week. He's been outstanding in Chuba Hubbard's absence. The Jets have got to contain that, and it looks like in the injury report, Chuba Hubbard is listed as questionable. It seems like he's trending in the right direction. He may also start, so there's another situation that just got to watch out for, a two-headed monster in that Carolina backfield, and you got to contain it. The Jets have had terrible games against the run this season. The Dallas game, so Javonte Williams have a monster game against us. The Buffalo game, you saw Cook have some long runs against us. They did well against Steelers. The Bucks, that was a game that was just Bucky Irving was able to beat us in many different ways. But yeah, against Denver, obviously the defense was just a different animal. I need to see more. I need to see this team can actually stack consecutive performances like that. And obviously, allowing 13 points and getting a safety is a really good performance by a defense. But something that's got to happen with this defense, they just gotta keep doing the little things right. Start with stopping the run, and then you gotta apply pressure. And I think that's been the area of the most concern for this defense as a whole. Against Aaron Rodgers and Steelers, Will McDonald had a couple sacks, but it feels like ever since then this defense has just not been able to apply pressure. Quarterbacks have been able to dissect and read the field at as slow a pace as they need to, because one, pressure is not getting home, and two, there are guys streaking down the field wide open. So pressure has got to come. If you're gonna beat this team, Bryce Young has got to be the one to make mistakes. It's been something that's been plaguing him throughout his career, and maybe he's making a turn to being a better quarterback than he was in his first few years in the league. But you still look at the Carolina Panthers and you still identify Bryce Young as being the area of their offense that you can try and exploit and force into a mistake. And if he makes mistakes, you're going to potentially give our offense, better field position to be able to try and find some points, because that's going to be a very difficult task for this offense. Unless guys like Breece Hall have monster games, this offense just seems like it's lacking that firepower to be able to stand up to some of these teams. They had a great game against Pittsburgh, but obviously we could see what Pittsburgh's defense has been this season. Just hasn't been great. Saw it last night against Cincinnati. They just haven't been good enough. Good enough to get some wins, but not good enough, to keep the winning going last night. And then the last thing for this Jets defense, as great as they were last week, when a team and a good coaching staff, that is, when a good team smells blood, they're going to attack it. And, in this particular game, it was clear as day that Sean Payton just identified that Justin Fields was not going to win the game. There was that series early in the game. Late in the game, in the fourth quarter, they were down. I think it was after the safety. They were trailing. It was when it was 11-10, and they had the ball on their side of the field. It was third and it wasn't even that long. Let's say third and 11. It was still third and long, but obviously, teams that are afraid of the other team being able to score and kind of get the game out of reach are gonna need to take advantage of that possession and try and get that first down and extend that drive. Sean Payton had no fear. He said, you know what, let's just run a quick draw, see what happens here. Then again, like 4 or 5 yards, obviously not enough for the first down. Punted Justin Fields, and I think it was a quick 3 and out, almost a turnover. It looked like Garrett Wilson made a catch, and Pat Surtain came with a quick breakup. But NFL officials claim that Garrett didn't make that third step. to establish that he had possession of the football. Jets caught a little break there. They were able to maintain possession and eventually had to punt the football. And I think on that next possession is when Denver was able to march down the field and get that eventual game-winning field goal. But anyway, this defense has got to shorten the field for the offense, and the offense got to be able to take advantage of that. What happened last week was absolutely ridiculous. The Jets defense accounted for a safety, a turnover to put the ball 35-yard line, wherever it was, for the first field goal of the game, and special teams contributed massively too, with a long kick return by whatever his name, Kene Nwagu, however you pronounce his last name. Big kick return, put the Jets in field goal range there as well. You're talking about right there, those 3 possessions, 8 points, and Jets were only able to muster 3 additional points in the year 2025 of offensive football. It's ridiculous. Things have got to get better for Justin Fields in this offense. And let's talk about that now, on how those things can get better, or what needs to happen this week to make those things better. And let's start with step 1. And I mentioned with defense a little bit too, but for offense, it's at a enormously simple, as simple as it can be. You got to do the easy things, and you got to do them, and you got to make them work. The easy things: completing passes, reading the field, find open player, throw the football, read the field, find open player, make the read options. Do you hand it off? Do you run with the football? Design some runs for Justin Fields to be able to use his legs. Obviously, Denver's a team that's going to be, they're not going to allow quarterbacks to beat them with their legs. That's just the recipe of that defense. They're elite. Denver's defense is absolutely outstanding. So I don't really look at last week as being why didn't they run the football? Obviously, it'd be nice to design some runs. You don't want to just completely abandon something because you think a defense is good at doing it. You want to test the tendencies and make sure that, what you've seen on film and what you've kind of dissected of your knowledge of that defense is actually true, and especially true for that day. There's weeks where teams, do things well, and then that week they just can't figure out how to do it. It's the NFL. It's the way it is. It's going to happen. The Jets didn't do that enough. It's really got to get down to the basics, and it needs to get down to the basics. Your number one player on this offense, Garrett Wilson, is going to miss multiple weeks, and Garrett Wilson has kind of helped shield and hide some of the deficiencies because his playmaking ability is outstanding. I'd love to see them given more opportunities down the field to be able to, kind of stretch out this defense a little bit. Maybe it opens things up for the running game. That has not happened. Same thing with Arian Smith. He's a speedster. That has not worked out in their favor either. And maybe there are shots to be had that Justin Fields is not seeing. We've identified that this guy is just missing open targets and just not even that he's missing them. He's not seeing them, which is even more absurd. I love to see that his eyes are working and he's throwing the ball there, but for whatever reason, his accuracy is a problem. And that's stuff that maybe you can work on. But vision in year 5 for him is a major concern. If he hasn't figured out by year 5, when is it ever going to happen? And players develop at different paces, and it all kind of works its way out sometimes for players. But for Justin Fields, it looks like his days as a passer are getting closer and closer to the end. If he cannot figure out how to play the quarterback position, your legs will only grant you so much time as an NFL player. At some point, players slow down. It's natural progression or regression of the athlete. That's why some receivers you don't want to give contracts to when they're approaching that 29, 30 season, because your expectation is that player is going to lose a step. Well, at some point, Justin Fields is going to lose a step, and if he cannot supplement that loss of step with growing as a passer, his days as an NFL quarterback are going to reach an end. Another thing this team has to do, when you look at Carolina's defense, obviously they have a couple players out there that you kind of eyeball. J.C. Horn at the cornerback spot, but Derek Brown in the middle he He can do things Quentin Williams can do, and he's a damn good player in the middle. And for the Jets, if they're going to be successful in this game, you would expect that this offense is able to do anything. It's because they're able to do things on the ground. And if that's the case, you gotta contain Derek Brown. You got to double team him consistently. There's been film out there of Quentin Williams having like 3 guys on him in passing situations. Like that's almost the kind of game plan you got to kind of have with Carolina. Although they have other players too on this defensive line that can cause some pain. So it's not really something that you can do, but you gotta use this man. You gotta add an extra lineman, maybe leaving Ruckert in some passing situations as an additional blocker. So you got kind of coverage around the offensive line, kind of put one-on-one across the board. But yeah, you just can't. If you're the Jets offense, you gotta identify that Derek Brown cannot be a guy that you allow to have his game. If he has a game, you're talking about something that could be uglier than what we saw in Denver, and that's saying a lot. Because at least in Denver, we had Garrett Wilson out there, and I know he had a bad game. I mean, bad game production-wise. There was a couple of missed opportunities that I feel like Justin Fields was late on throwing the football. There were a couple of plays that Garrett Wilson had the ball in his hands, didn't complete the catch. Obviously, it's not all on Justin Fields, but a lot of it is. But losing Garrett Wilson, it takes away a huge piece of what this Jets offense is. And the last thing I'll point out is got to be aggressive, but you got to be smart with it too. There was a number of opportunities throughout the season, really, where you kind of point at, when you're watching games on, I feel like Sunday Night Football does it. I think Thursday Night Football does it as well, where they kind of show you the toggle, like 4th and 2, go for it or punt or kick, field goal, whatever the options are. And it kind of toggles like what the analytics say. And I know analytics kind of junky by any means, but you can kind of identify where a team is on the field and whether it's worth it to go for it and whether it's worth it to punt or kick a field goal, whatever have you. I feel like there have been a number of situations where the Jets kind of deviate from what you think is logical. And it's kind of weird that that's the case because, and I hate the comparisons. They talk about it all the friggin' time. But it's kind of weird that this particular comparison doesn't get brought up nearly enough as it should be. Every time that there's an argument to be made for the Jets not doing well, whatever have you, this coaching staff, specifically Aaron Glenn, always kind of revert back to, well, when I was with the Lions. Well, when I was with the Lions. Well, when the Lions were 3-13 or whether, when we were 0-8 or when we were 0-6, whatever have you. There's always that conversation that happens in these, media conversations that kind of get under my skin a little bit because, you're not the Lions. You always, whenever he's asked, when you were here and Bill Parcells, blah, blah, blah. Oh, I'm Aaron Glenn. I'm not Bill Parcells. Oh, I'm Aaron Glenn. I'm not Bill Parcells. Fine, whatever. Be your own guy. But then how come when it works in your favor, do you always deviate to something different? Why do you always revert back to the Lions? Aren't you the New York Jets? It's a very weird situation that I personally I have issues with how Aaron Glenn handles these press conferences. I appreciate the fact that he's not trying to, like early in the offseason, I did like, even though we all, have our opinions on Michael Clemens, I did like when Michael Clemens was missing some time in the voluntary portion of OTAs or whatever it was. And Aaron Glenn was talking to the media, talking about how he has great attendance, blah, blah, blah. And the media pointed out that Michael Clemens wasn't there to try and make a story out of it. And Aaron Glenn kind of shut it down really quick. He's like, he's been here, he missed this week or whatever the case may be, defended his players. And I appreciate that from a head coach. It's a lot better than what Robert Saleh did the year prior when, Aaron Rodgers missed the mandatory week of OTAs and like kind of instead of being like, and I feel like he could have handled that conversation a little differently. He made a story out of it basically by his response. Said something like, Aaron had something that he had to do that's more important or whatever the words were exactly. But that's kind of the perception you got from it. And that's the perception that some of the media got was, Aaron Rodgers thinks a vacation in Egypt or wherever the heck he went to is more important than quarterback for the Jets. Like that wasn't the story. Like that was the story that developed because of it, but that wasn't the context of it. And I thought that was a stupid way of responding to that question. And I respected the fact that Aaron Glenn took, defended his player. Like, oh yeah, he missed today, but it's still voluntary. And again, he's been here for most of the process. That I appreciated, and I appreciate him standing to the media for that. But there's other ways that he's going about this week in and week out, where it's just the question about from that Costello asked after the game, like Justin Fields played terrible, any thought on going to Tyrod Taylor? And he asked Costello, like, oh, what's wrong with you? Like, why are you asking that question? I see what you're trying to do, blah blah blah. Like, what's he trying to do? He's trying to ask you a legitimate question about whether or not you saw what the rest of the world saw, including people in Europe, because you were playing at 9 a.m. Everyone saw what the hell we saw. It doesn't take a genius. Like, I know you were playing in Europe, and maybe they don't understand the game as much as people in the United States do, I guess. Like, maybe you thought you could squeeze out the fact that Justin Fields played terrible at the quarterback position, but they're not idiots either. We all saw. I mean, they've been seeing NFL for long enough to understand what good teams versus bad teams look like. They've seen the good teams play out there. It's not the days of Jacksonville being the only team playing out there anymore. And even Jacksonville looks way better than we do at this state of their rebuild. It's just unfortunate that, again, I understand he's a former player. He understands the media better than maybe other coaches that come from external organizations when Saleh came here. I mean, everyone knows what the New York media is to an extent, but it's one thing to come in and actually experience New York media. And Aaron Glenn knows what it's like. He's a former player, understands it, whatever, fine. But you got to go about it a little bit of a different way. You really do. You've got to answer the freaking question and answer it in a way that doesn't make it seem like the media is a bunch of idiots. Sometimes they'll ask questions and he'll correct them. And I do like that too. A few weeks ago, I want to say it was Sauce Gardner left the game. Rich Cimini said, Sauce left the game. Any updates on that? I want to say it was a Tampa game, if I remember right. Or maybe it was a Dallas game. One or the other. I think it was a Tampa game. And then, Glenn's response was, "Oh, he came back in the game. You gotta watch. You gotta watch the game, or whatever it was." A little bit of a smirk, kind of asshole way of saying it. Fine, whatever. I'm okay with stuff like that. I don't mind that. But what I do mind is you using this "I'm me and no one else" mentality to your process. But then when it's convenient for you, you like to point out, "Oh, but Detroit was like this. Oh, but I talked to Tony Dungy, and they were off to a terrible start. I talked to Parcells." It's when it's convenient for him to kind of, "Oh, I'm not me. I'm kind of working off of what I know, blah blah blah, what I experienced, so on and so forth." It just, I don't know. Maybe I'm overthinking this. Maybe I'm just kind of getting to that point where, and I think it's a good conversation to start having at some point. I personally, if you ask me right now, what's going to happen at the head coaching spot? Is it going to be Aaron Glenn? Are the Jets going to move on? If you asked me today, I would say it's probably 80% sure that Aaron Glenn will be back. Aaron Glenn and Muji will both be back. Especially if they attack this trade deadline as sellers, which I think, and the bye week kind of works out in their favor a little bit here, because I think the trade deadline is November 4th, and the Jets have this game coming up on Sunday. They have a game against the Bengals on the 26th, and then they have a bye week, and then their first game back November 9th. I'm pretty sure the NFL trade deadline is November 4th, so they'll have that week of the bye week to kind of get their bearings down. Figure out, who's here, who's not. Let's make those decisions. And then they'll come back that Tuesday, a little bit of a different team. There's going to be players that, that are here today that aren't going to be here then. Yes, November 4th is the trade deadline, 4 p.m. So, yeah, the Jets have 2 games left, that, including this week coming up, where everyone that's here is going to be here. And it's possible they might make trades this coming week. But I think the more logical thing is, and obviously there'll be trades, they might take the slow approach to this whole thing. Obviously, it depends on health too. Is Quincy's a guy you look at, expiring contract, probably a guy that gets moved. But, that's a player that's also kind of going through some injury stuff right now. So, teams are obviously going to be concerned, is going to be back? Am I trading assets for a player that may not even be back until middle of December when, obviously it'd be nice to have him. If a team's trading for him, they have playoff aspirations, and that's when they want him for, obviously. But get what you can get for some of these players, while also kind of looking at the future too. Something we have to understand too is the Jets don't lose out on players. Like, the whole trade him now for something or you get nothing for him is partially true. Trade a player now, you don't get comp picks. Trade a player now, you get guaranteed whatever pick it is. Trade him a few weeks from now, lose him in the offseason. There's a formula that the NFL free agency uses that's going to calculate whether or not you get comp picks and stuff like that for some of these players. Now, if I'm the Jets, I wouldn't go crazy with that formula because you're probably spending a lot of money either this offseason or the next. I honestly look at this offseason as an offseason to kind of retool this defense a little bit and bring in some, adequate playmakers. Not, you're not going to get the Jamar Chases of the world. You're not going to get T. Higgins. I mean, obviously I know those guys aren't free agents, but you're not going to get players of that caliber. You kind of got to go shopping in that, if you're an Aldi fan, you got to go look for those Aldi finds. You know what I mean? You got to figure out what players match your flavor, and you got to find players that are willing to develop with a young quarterback too. That's going to make it a little difficult. The Jets are going to be picking in the top 5. They're going to be picking a quarterback of the future, and it's not going to be Justin Fields. Justin Fields might be here by proxy of he's got guaranteed money next year. Does it make sense to move on from him? It might make sense. But the Jets need to use this offseason as an opportunity to kind of build up that defense a little bit, put some weapons around this quarterback, and take a couple of years, retool this team through the draft, use free agency to kind of build out this roster. And I'm not saying be aggressive in free agency, but you got to find weaknesses. And so the Jets have kind of approached free agency over the last few years, even with Joe Douglas at the helm mainly, of bargain shopping, which has worked out to some degree. They found guys like John Simpson. They found players like DJ Reed. There's been some successes in free agency, but there's been a lot more misses, especially by this regime specifically. Cisco has not been a good safety. Stevens started off terribly. He's kind of turned the corner a little bit. He's not as much of a pain in the ass as he was the first few weeks, so maybe there's something there. I really do like what Darren Bougie has done with the trade market. I think you'd have a very different opinion of him if it wasn't for those 3 trades he's made so far. The trades being Jawan Briggs, Phillips, and obviously Brownlee, who we mentioned earlier. Like, those 3 trades could potentially be a situation where it's like, so I'm pretty sure all 3 of those guys are under contract next year as well. I know for a fact Jawan Briggs is. I know Brownlee is. I forget with Phillips. I'm pretty sure he's also under contract next year. So you're talking about you trade away a pick swap, so 6 for a 7th type of thing, in 3 different scenarios. I think one was a little bit higher than a 6 for a 7th. But regardless, you trade away day 3 picks for guys that are going to be likely starters next year. this year and next. Let's be real, because they're all in there. And you got starting caliber players for late round picks. I mean, that's understanding the business. That's understanding the trade market and understanding trade value and getting pretty damn good value for it. I mean, the chance of you getting a starting caliber player for a 6th round pick, let's ignore the pick swap part of it, but getting a starting caliber player for a 6th round pick, it happens, but it's very slim. I've talked about it so many times, like the way the NFL draft works, in my opinion, is you're trying to get elite players in round 1. You're trying to get starters in the 2nd and 3rd round. And you're looking for special teams, backup players in the 4th and 5th round. And 6th and 7th round, you're literally throwing a dart at the dartboard. You're just hoping for something. And the Jets use those darts, and they said, you know what, let's look at other teams' depth charts and say, okay, Cleveland, that defensive line is outstanding. There's going to be a guy that's going to shake free through the waivers. Let me call him really quick and say, hey, instead of losing this guy to waivers, want a 6th round pick for him? Sure, we'll take a 6th round pick. Done. They get something. And they've used that market as a way of really building up this defensive line to the point where it's not as dog shit as it was going into the season. We were looking at Tufele being, basically your number 2 defensive lineman coming into the season. Well, you avoided that potential catastrophe by getting starting caliber players that you believe represent the toughness that you want this defense to look like, especially this defensive line. They went out there, they got these players, and they look like solid contributors, and they will be contributors this year and next. Again, I got to look at Phillips and see if he's on the roster for next year. But I'm almost certain he is. Almost certain. Key. He is. He's on the roster next year for $7.5 million. And I don't think the Jets are going to use that as an area to move on from him. But the Jets are going to have $75 million in cap space next year. And if they use those resources correctly, you're talking about a team that can potentially have $75 million going into the following year, or another $70 million going into the following year. The Jets are in position to do something, and they can do it, but they got to be smart with it. I really can't stress enough that this team has got to use the next few weeks of the season and really look towards the future, because the present isn't it. You got way too many holes on this team. Way too many. It only makes sense from a Jets standpoint to look towards the future and Elias players that you're looking at on this team, I'll name them, the players that I can envision being legitimate trade candidates. John Simpson being one of them. Michael Carter being another one of them. Quincy Williams being another. Lazard, but you're not going to get shit for him. Could be missing someone. Oh, obviously, Breece Hall. We've obviously been all over the market for that. So I have 4 guys that I don't know that they're in the future, in your future plans. And if they're not, you really have this conversation. Breece Hall, I don't see his team paying Breece Hall starting caliber money, especially for what he thinks he is and what he believes he is, and what I think a lot of Jet fans believe he can be. You're looking at Breece Hall. He's going to probably get in the open market a good $8 to $10 million a year, maybe even more than that, depending on how desperate teams are to get an elite running back in their system. Breece Hall kind of comes off as that kind of player. There's other players you got to look at too. Jermaine Johnson, I mentioned earlier. I don't have any interest in training a guy like Jermaine Johnson out of here. I think he's part of the solution, not part of the problem. Will McDonald, like the Jets are going to be in a situation where they're not going to be paying a quarterback for the next 4 years potentially, because they'll be picking a quarterback in the first round. Obviously, they'll have dead cap from Rodgers and Justin Fields over the next couple of years. Well, next year, and then I think just next year they'll have dead cap. Yeah, next year will be the only dead cap for quarterbacks, and then obviously you'll have $35 million for Rodgers, and potentially $22 million for Fields. Oof, man, that's crazy. $57 million in dead cap. I mean, for the cap savings of $1 million, you're probably just going to keep Justin Fields on the roster because you need a backup quarterback. Because I think Tyrod, I don't think Tyrod's on the roster next year. And that's another $2 million there because actually the Jets did one of those kick the money out kind of things. So there's now $2.4 million in dead cap. So you're actually between the three quarterbacks, Aaron Rodgers, Tyrod Taylor, and Justin Fields, you have $35 million plus 22 or 23 million if the Jets decide to keep. I think for the extra $1 million, you keep him as a backup. So yeah, 35 plus 22 gets us to 57, plus another 2.4 gets you to almost $60 million in quarterback dead cap money. And then you got to get a first overall pick. They're going to be paying $2 in year one, which obviously isn't crazy money, but still around. I think it's still around like $7 or $8 million for a rookie in year one. Yeah, that's kind of nuts, but you know what? It's going to be 1 year of misery of dead cap, and then the following year, hopefully they get this slate wiped clean. But yeah, you got really look at every player on this roster and kind of ask yourself, is that player part of our future, or can we get something of value for these players? Guy Quinnen Williams probably get some good capital for a guy like him. He's still like 27, 28 years old. Still got a good 3 or 4 years of elite play left potentially. Kind of hitting his prime. Are the Jets in position to keep him around? That's a hard one for me. For Quinnen, I mean, he's a great player, but if you can get a first and a third, maybe like a first and a third this year and third next year, a third this year and a second next year, or just a first and second anywhere, like first this year, second next year. I feel like as a team, you almost got to kind of do yourself justice and say that might be worth it. Your defensive line looks okay at the moment. You still need to develop some depth, but you're 2 years away from the defensive line being completely revamped because I think Briggs is under contract for this year and next, maybe one more year actually. But Phillips, I think for sure next year is his last year in his contract. Yeah, I mean, that's obviously a conversation for another day. But let me know in your comments. I do have a lot of interest in talking about what this team could be in the future. I think that could be, a lot of fun to kind of talk about a little bit. Although, define fun when you're in October talking about next year already, it's kind of disastrous. But being a Jets fan is that's basically the recipe. You get excited for the season just for it to be over by 3 weeks, 4 weeks. I'm kind of used to the Jet season being over by Columbus Day, or Indigenous People Day, whatever you want to call it nowadays. But yeah, Jet fans, I mean, it's grim, but all I'll tell you is take a look at this quarterback class and really kind of identify it for what it's worth. There are some good players here, and every year that they say there is. But I actually tend to like a couple of these prospects, which I can give a deeper dive at a later point in time. But I actually do like some of these prospects. And, if the Jets are handling the situation the right way and they're really trying to build this thing the right way, it does make sense to, as a quarterback that's going to be developing, for this kind of be a spot where you can kind of, if you have the tools and if you have the smarts and if you have the right coaching, the Jets are a team that might actually kind of, believe it or not, be a good landing spot for a young rookie quarterback. It's crazy to say, but they're going to have 3 starting spots on the offensive line filled for sure, 100%. Between Tippmann and the 2 tackles, Vashnu and Membu. Solid. You got 3/5 of your offensive line ready to go for opening day. You're going to have an elite number 1 wide receiver on the outside, Garrett Wilson, for sure. He's here. He's locked up for the next 4 or 5 years, whatever the contract was. He's here, and he'll be here for a long time. You are going to have, a security blanket for a young quarterback in Mason Taylor under contract for the next 3 years. And he's shown some promise. You're going to have a running back in Braylon Allen, but that's going to be an area where the Jets are going to need to address. I think that's a good area for them to use free agency potentially. There's always decent running backs in free agency that nobody wants to pay. There's the top-notch guys like Breece Hall's going to be next year, like Saquon Barkley was a couple of years ago, that are going to demand top-end money. But then you also have guys like, Montgomery, Singletary with the Giants a couple of years ago that can get somewhere between $4 to $6 million a year, maybe a little bit more than that, that are efficient runners and, good little players to put in the backfield. And maybe the Jets use the draft and with their additional draft capital from these trades that we're expecting, get somebody in the 3rd or 4th round that you can develop. I look at Singleton out of Penn State. I look at him. I think he's a pretty decent running back. I think he's someone you could definitely, get in that 3rd round, and he can be a playmaker for this team. Interesting player there that, could kind of fit in right away and be your kind of outside runner, while Braylon Allen's your interior kind of nose downhill type of runner. But the most important thing is going to be for the Jets is how do they address the wide receiver room? That wide receiver room behind Garrett Wilson is very grim. They have Arian Smith, but I don't feel confident going into a season with Arian Smith being your 2 or even 3 wide receiver. I think the best possible utilization of Arian Smith is he's your number 4 deep threat gadget type of guy. The Jets need another veteran on the outside, opposite Garrett Wilson. Ideally, someone that complements Garrett Wilson would be kind of ideal. A big body guy, possession receiver type of guy that can get open pretty consistently would be ideal. Who can also kind of stretch the field when needed. I think that's probably the area Garrett Wilson doesn't. And I'm not saying he doesn't thrive in. He could definitely thrive in that area. But I think that's the area that he isn't utilized as much in. I think he's more – the Jets want to get him the ball in space. Jets want to give him the ball kind of in that, middle of the safety, behind the linebacker section. So that's his, big play area. I think that's the area that Jets kind of want to really use Garrett Wilson in. And the way you open that stuff up is by having the safeties have to rely – or, be cautious of somebody else being able to take the top off. And they're going to get a 3rd receiver, maybe through the draft. It's going to be very interesting. Again, the Jets have so many holes on this team. I'm just talking offense right here because let's be realistic here. I think the most important thing for the Jets to do, especially if they're picking a quarterback in the 1st round, is assure that you're putting this guy in the best situation possible to succeed. And I think they have a lot of the recipe for that, but they need to just put those last few ingredients into this offense. Just acquire assets, use those assets efficiently towards the offense while also understanding your defense needs some work too. They're going to need a safety, at least one. Corner, I think they're okay with at the moment. You got Stevens out there, and you're not going to, he's got some guaranteed money next year. Yeah, he's got a lot of guaranteed money next year, and you can't cut him. So I think he signed a three-year contract. So he's out there. Maybe you got to look towards the future, and 2027 might be an area where you move on from Stevens. Even there, no, that you can move on in 2027 if needed. $14 million cap number. Jets would end up saving $8 million on it. So 2027 might be the year you look for Stevens to move out. But you got AZ Thomas out there too. So maybe Thomas kind of develops into your number two corner, opposite Sauce, and who knows even where that goes down the road at some point. But yeah, corner looks okay. Linebacker is going to need some work. Sherwood's going to need to take a step in the right direction. Mayagoa, again, I view this guy as like a depth guy, not a starter. Maybe he can develop into one. I don't know. But I think the Jets are definitely going to need to kind of address linebacker at some point. And then the defensive line, especially if you're making some trades like Jermaine Johnson, Will McDonald, Quinnen Williams, got to keep an eye towards the future too. You're going to have some guys leaving here within the next 2 or 3 years that, obviously, who knows if this regime is even here in 2 or 3 years. I think I have my doubts. But nonetheless, you're going to need to put some assets towards this defense. And you do those things. The Jets aren't as dog shit as maybe one would think. There's an area where this team could be competing at a low level next year and in the mix for some fun the following year. It's just really going to come down to coaching, guys. I hate to say it, but it's really going to come down to whether or not Aaron Glenn is a coach and if he's good enough to be developing this roster. Because the Jets are going to rely on a lot of young players. If they're trading away a lot of these key players, there's 1 or 2 ways to replace them: through the draft or through free agency. If you do it through free agency, it's going to be expensive. It's not going to be cheap. If you do it through the draft, you got to have coaches in place that you trust are going to develop these players. And through 5 weeks, 6 weeks of the season, I have concerns that maybe the development isn't as promising as we would like to see for a team that's probably going to be picking a lot of young players in the next 2-3 years. Let's see. But I'm optimistic. There's an area, there's an avenue where this team could be competing in a couple of years. And maybe having a little bit of fun next year. Can they hit this quarterback? Can we for once draft a guy that, looks like he's worth his slot? Say we want about Sam Darnold, whatever. That's revisionist history. The Jets had him. They screwed up. They hired the wrong coach. That's the moral of the story. They hired Adam Gase instead of Mike McCarthy. Say what you want about McCarthy, but I'm pretty sure he would have had this offense doing some successful things, at least in the regular season. Maybe we get to the playoffs and we suck in the playoffs like he did with Dallas for all those years. Fine. Tell me a Jet fan I wouldn't have signed up for that. Ask me where that fucking dotted line would have been. If you told me the Jets would be in the playoffs, I don't know. I'm not even going to say 5 of the 6 years or even 2 or 3 times. since Donald's rookie year, with Donald as your quarterback. So that's 2019, right? He was drafted in 2018, had his rookie year. We hired Gase in 2019. So you would have 2019, would have the friggin' mono situation, and then would have the 2020 year. And 2020 is when that was the 2-14 year. That was the Tank for Trevor year. I mean, I think McCarthy would have a little bit more respect from his locker room. I don't think you have the whole Jamal Adams fiasco with McCarthy here. And even if you did, I think he has the same kind of draft capital, hopefully. And I trust McCarthy a little bit better as an offensive play caller to get guys in the building. Are they drafting Zach Wilson? Maybe. But, I mean, if they were in a similar situation, obviously McCarthy probably heads out too. But I don't think they would have been. I think you would have seen clear-cut development from the quarterback. You would have seen true offensive play calling. I mean, McCarthy was a good play caller. He just wasn't a great head coach. You would have some good play calling. You would have quarterback trending in the upwards direction. And based off what we saw in the last 6 games of Darnold's rookie year, it could have been something special there. But yeah, you would have a quarterback trending in the right direction. And maybe we're having a completely different conversation all these years later. Talking about the Jets not being a laughingstock, but having Darnold here and taking that trajectory of slow development into what he is today. We're not talking about the Jets needing to draft, a quarterback next April. We're not talking about even the Jets probably having, a dog shit offense, but it's where we're at. It's where we're at. It's what we're living in. It's the New York friggin' Jets, the goddamn Jets. Anyway, let me know what you guys think. Again, I want to take some time in the next few weeks, kind of wrap my head around this Jets team as a whole, and give you guys some insight into what this team needs to do, what needs to be the step in the right direction for this team to kind of get shit figured out. And it could be a little bit of fun, kind of looking towards the future and being hopeful. I mean, that's all we really can do at this point is just hope that the pieces in place are, the leadership at least, is going to be able to turn this thing around. Say what you want, but I find it very difficult to believe that Aaron Glenn will not be the head coach of the Jets in 2026. Just find it hard to believe. Do I think it should be? I am not saying that either. I think if the season gets awry and the Jets are picking the first overall, there's some difficult conversations that have to happen. But I still think even with all that, especially how the trade deadline goes, but I even think with all that, you put yourself in a situation where Woody's got to ask himself, do I want this regime picking my franchise quarterback? Do I want this regime being responsible for another quarterback? And do I want that to be like a lame duck coach being the one responsible for his development? Because if the Jets have the first pick, you can't sit here and tell me that Aaron Glenn has next year with a rookie and the following year on the second. It's possible that those conversations are there, but it's not like Aaron Glenn could have 2-14 this year, and then next year be, 4-12, and guaranteed as a year 3. It's very difficult to pass that test. But we've seen some crazy shit, especially being fans of Jets. Anyway, let me know what you think. If you haven't already, hit the like button, subscribe to my channel, and let's go Jets.